Hey, welcome everyone. This is a podcast that explores various aspects of addiction, potentially focusing on personal stories of recovery, scientific perspectives, societal impacts, or related topics. This podcast often features discussions with experts, individuals in recovery, therapists, and advocates to offer insights and support to those affected by addiction or seeking more information about it. Welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. I'm your host, Al Richards, and today, with our guest, Josie White, we're going to be talking about domestic violence and its overlap with substance abuse and mental health. And so you guys get to know who Josie is. Josie is the Director of Development at South Valley Services. She is a seasoned nonprofit leader with expertise in resources development and fundraising. She excels in grant acquisitions, marketing, and volunteer coordination, working closely with executive director and board to advance the organization's mission. As a certified fundraising executive, Josie has a proven track record of securing grants and enhancing donor retention, currently pursuing a master's in nonprofit management and philanthropy. She is dedicated to leveraging her skills and education for a meaningful impact. Josie, thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to be with us today. It's an honor.
I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. And I love the last little bit of what I read there about wanting to use your skills and the education for a meaningful impact, because that's what we're all about here on the other side of addiction, is making an impact and educating people and getting them to, I don't know, just a way of hopefully get rid of the stigma of things, and even with the topic of domestic violence and substance abuse and mental health, I mean, it all falls into that same doggone box.
Absolutely. There's so much overlap between the three that I think sometimes people aren't necessarily aware of. So having this platform to discuss it in greater depth and then share this messaging is so, so important.
Yeah, definitely. And sharing it, you just hit another key word, right? Sharing it and using our voice. You know, I believe I already know, because when we met at the Blue Door Networking Group last month, or actually at the beginning of this month, I believe I asked you what got you into this type of work, but I'd like our listeners to know what what sparked your interest in doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to help people, but exactly how I wanted to help wasn't always clear. I did know that I could not go into medicine. I'm so squeamish. So medicine was at least always off the table, but there were so many other ways to help people that I wasn't really sure where I fit in. But when I was 19, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which later developed into schizoaffective disorder, which is kind of what I describe as a little tango between schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, with manifestations of symptoms from both disorders. And so I became very interested in helping people who had conditions similar to mine, but weren't given the same resources. And it was just by luck of the draw that I was born into a family that had insurance and money to help pay for what wasn't covered by insurance and a supportive network. And I think it is foolish for us to look at that situation and think that it's as accessible and as easy for everyone else. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that if I wasn't born into those resources, I would either be homeless, using drugs, or dead, and maybe all three. And it's an uncomfortable discussion, but most of us are a lot closer to homelessness than we are to riches, especially if we have a chronic condition like a serious mental health condition. And so I decided I wanted to help homeless adults who are dealing with severe and persistent mental illness. So SPIMI clients is what they call them, which in and of itself, I don't know if those labels are necessarily helpful, but that is the label that clinical teams sometimes use. And so
Okay.
I decided I wanted to go into social work And I was just not cut out for it. I worked for a jail diversion outreach team, and I think I lasted 6 months. I wasn't far enough in my own recovery journey from dealing with this mental health to be an asset, and I couldn't compartmentalize work and home. And so, after a brief stint in the corporate world, I found myself in nonprofit development work at a substance use disorder facility. And I just fell in love with that work. I could use my skill set, so public speaking, writing, making connections, meeting people in a way that helped a lot of people, probably more than I would as a single social worker in a way that didn't totally sacrifice my well-being. And then I ended up at South Valley Services, and the overlap between substance use, like I mentioned, um, homelessness, mental illness, and domestic violence is just so complex and interrelated that I've been able to work with the populations I've been interested in, even though it wasn't on the path I thought it would be.
Wow, that is very interesting. So really just not too long ago, you pretty much found your why.
Yes.
Wow, good for you, because it took me till my late 50s before I found
Yeah.
my why, especially after I lost my job of 24 years, because I didn't know which direction I wanted to go with my life. I just knew I wanted to do something different. And I also knew I needed to change who I was as an individual. So good for you. And thank you for sharing too, that you were blessed enough to come from a family that had different resources to kind of help you along the way, because I don't really think society understands the backstory of individuals who are unsheltered, right, and living on the streets. Because, and again, I haven't talked to a lot of people except for people that I've had on my show who've lived on the streets due to their drug use and different things like that. However, even with them, they're like, I wanted help. I really wanted help. I just didn't have the means to get there, right? Because a lot of times, especially if it's a child, mom and dads put their homes up at a second mortgage just to help pay for detox and recovery centers. And it's tough because a lot of these individuals are also forced in recovery. And when that happens, they're not ready. It's just going to be a failed attempt. Not saying that they're failures, because they're not, they're just not quite there, right? And we rely so much too on insurance companies, which in my eyes, and I'm just frank on this show, they're not there for us at all. We put our lives of our loved ones in their hands because they determine how long somebody gets treated. And to me, that's BS. Because probably, as you know, it takes time, right? You have to learn certain skills and learn different things about whatever it is that you're battling to give you the tools to overcome these things.
And it does take time, right? For me, and I, like I said, I not acknowledging the privilege I came from and the foundation I had to work through this would be a grave mistake. And but as part of that, it took me 4 hospitalizations, 10 years to find a medication that worked. And the only way I'm able to pay for the medication, one of the medications I'm currently on, is through insurance. Without insurance, it'd be $1,600 a month because it's new to the market and there's not a generic yet. And so any system that I just, this is a little bit of a tangent from domestic violence, but I truly believe that as long as there are people who are homeless on our streets against their will, we as a society are failing. And there's no if, ands, or buts about it. If we're not giving people the resources they need to treat whatever health condition they have, to treat substance use disorders, to find safe housing, we are failing. And there are, like I said, I've already said it, but there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We are failing. And that's why I've dedicated my career to try to overhaul those systems that aren't working for everyone.
I will second your motion. I mean, seriously, I concur with everything you just said. And good for you for seeing the failure out there, a broken system, and wanting to be an individual. I got goosebumps over here on this side, being an individual who wants to make a difference, because it's people like yourself, Josie, and South Valley Services, right? That are there because they're seeing the failure. And we are. We're failing our own, I don't know how to put this. We're just failing lives in general, right? Lives that need help, because we all need help in one way or another. And some of us, by the grace of God, or however our life story is written, we're able to fall in different things to kind of help us along the way. And other people, their illness may be a little stronger, and it may be harder for them, and they may not come from a family or have those resources. And who else is it up to? It's up to us. You know, go ahead.
Oh, I feel so strongly that, well, first, there's always sometimes this question of like, oh, well, why me? Why do I have to go through this hardship? But I try to ask myself, why not me? And that's a humbling question, right? Because why not me? But I feel so strongly that I am supposed to use what has happened to me to advocate for others, because I am an example of what happens when the system works well, and living proof that if we had a system that worked well for everyone, I mean, so many things would be either preventable or treatable. And if we invested research dollars in substantial ways, I would argue things could even probably be curable. But we don't know that right now because we're just not investing in our community and our community members, and people who really need that support in a substantial way that's going to help over the long term. And so we'll see what I end up doing with my life, right? I'd assert I'm still pretty young, so I've got time to make more of an impact. But seeing the work that organizations like South Valley Services and other organizations I've worked at, there are a network of so many people who care and want to help. It's just getting our message out there and letting people know that, at least for South Valley Services, we are just a phone call away. And then you have access to dozens of staff members who care about you and are invested in your success. And our services are free, which is really good. We offer free short-term clinical therapy. We offer free case management, and for as long as people need. And then our shelter program's also free. But I mean, there's still limitations with that, right? Our shelter is limited to 55 beds. Sometimes we will be at capacity, but we can place people into short-term hotel stays. The caveat there is they fill out a lethality assessment protocol, and if their lives are deemed to be in imminent danger, then we can place them into a hotel. Unfortunately, this isn't a solution for general homelessness. It has to be somebody whose life is deemed to be in imminent danger. And so that's another shortcoming of the system. But the good news is that there are a lot of people out there fighting to do what they can to create a better today, tomorrow, and world for people who are in need of those resources.
Yeah. Amen. There really is. You know, I started a networking group called ARC, and it stands for Addiction Resilience Collective. And I started it last February, and then around July it kind of fizzled out. And working on something by yourself, it takes a lot of time, which I did not have. Right at that time, I was working two jobs, and what I call my Holy Spirit, when it's whispering in my ear and it's continuously coming up, it's like this thing needs to get going again. And I started reaching out to some of the amazing lady friends that I have that are also like in the recovery community and different things, and they all wanted to be a part of it. So it's something I'd like to talk with you about, not on the show here because I don't want to take your
Yeah.
time, but after the show, I'd like to talk to you about it, because it's exactly what you just said, Josie. It's about bringing people in a group who do a plethora of things, but yet it all falls underneath that same umbrella or that realm, right?
Yeah.
Because what may work for you doesn't work for me, and vice versa. However, if we have a relationship and we know somebody, we can send that person to another individual, and say, hey, give this one a shot. Maybe that's what will fit for you. However, if we don't know about South Valley services, how are we supposed to refer people to go get help? Because we haven't heard of you. And and also when you're like nonprofit, a lot of times the money's not always there to market. So you have to rely on other people to spread the word.
Yeah. Oh, it's so important, word of mouth. And we've got this unique, I was going to say tango, but I already said tango. I guess I'm just feeling the tango metaphor today. But
All
this
right.
unique balance to strike between being known, so people know, for example, that we've got community-based resource centers in Tooele and in Salt Lake County, where people can drop in and out for services without having to stay for a shelter, without having a shelter stay mandated. But we also need to be under the radar just enough that our shelter locations remain confidential so people can't find our high risk clients and we can keep them and our staff safe. So we've got this careful balance of how do we be known but not too known, and how do we responsibly promote ourselves without misusing funds that could otherwise go to direct programming. And so it's this interesting balance. But again, like I said, these opportunities where we can lift each other up and teach each other about the available resources to spread by word of mouth, we will be doing such a better service to the people in our community. We mentioned it right before recording. You say South Valley Services, and a lot of times you get a reaction of, who?
Yeah.
And that is not what we want. We want to be South Valley Services, or SBS shortened, and have people be like, oh my gosh, I love those guys. I saw them on the news last week, or I saw them on this podcast. And we know them, we know their work, and we know they're reliable. And so that's what I work on.
And I love that's exactly what you're doing. And there's some things that I'll talk to you after the show as well. I'm making a little note here just to throw out there. Maybe you guys have done it, maybe you have not, but I also have some connections, of people that I have met in the past 3 years of being involved in the recovery community and things. So again, I believe we all have to help one another. And it's yeah, and I also am a firm believer, because I see it all the time. Salt Lake, or Utah in general, I think has such an amazing recovery community that they're all there for one another, right? It's not a competition. It's nothing. It's how can we help? And that is huge in my eyes.
Yeah, and it's similar in the domestic violence realm. I would assert that the domestic violence shelters and providers are so willing to support each other through the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition. There are monthly meetings for all the executive directors, monthly meetings for all the development directors, and I think there's one for the finance directors too. But we're all looking for ways we can support each other and help one another and lift each other up. Unfortunately, the need for services far outpaces what's available. So by working together and coordinating resources and helping uplift one another, we can serve people who need it the most. And that's much more important than being, I mean, it's much more important than being the best and having the reputations the best. What's more important is what we can do collectively to help one another, to help the people in our community. And I think in our state, we do a pretty good job of that, at least from my perspective. There might be somebody listening who's like, that's not true. But from my perspective, that's true.
Yes, yes. And speaking of the domestic violence, I mean, I hear so many different things, right? And I really don't know what to think of it right now, in all honesty. I heard Utah is like one of the best states they're just nailing down domestic violence. They're really tough on it. And then I interview someone who has gone through it, and they're like, no one gave a crap. And that's just
Yeah.
saying it nicely, right? And it's like, so which way is it? And I get a little emotional because I had a guest on my show a couple years ago who came from that background. and she was writing a book called A Broken Wing. And it was my friend Lori introduced me to Yvonne. And this lady had her arm and shoulder completely shattered from the domestic violence. She lost 80% of the mobility in this arm. And from what she shared, what the courts was allowing, this lady was in fear for her life constantly. So bad, she ended up taking her own life because she couldn't let it go. Excuse my French, but this shit's got to stop.
Yes.
And it goes both ways because there are men who also are part of domestic violence, right? Because of mental health issues or drug use or whatever it may be. However, we know the larger percentage is the females that are dealing with it. So I think what you're, with the topic of wanting to talk about domestic violence, I think is huge.
Yeah, and I guess in response, I would say we need to hold space for both being true. That we're both one of the best states and one of the worst states. And I guess we'll start with why we're one of the worst states. And domestic violence in Utah occurs at rates higher than the national average. It's 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and 1 in 2 non-binary persons are going to experience domestic abuse within their lifetimes. So that includes the whole lifespan from early ages to elder abuse. So it can occur at a bunch of different points throughout somebody's lifespan, but those are the rates. In other ways, we are one of the most or more innovative states. For example, in not the last legislative session, but the 2023 legislative session, the legislature moved to mandate the lethality assessment protocol statewide. And that's a 13 or 12 question questionnaire law enforcement can use when responding to domestic violence calls. And it's to catch the lethality risk in cases where it might be missed, right? They might just be responding to domestic disturbance call, only to find out that all of these horrendous other things have been happening and it puts the person's life at high risk. And then law enforcement is trained on how to respond and how to respond effectively. And the good news is that we know this practice is not only evidence-based, but it's effective in saving lives. So we've got kind of this interesting balance of our state taking action, but also there being such an overwhelming need that we're still one of the worst states in the nation. I think we might be the third worst. For a while, I think we were the worst. And then we dropped down to third, which sounds good, except what happened is domestic violence skyrocketed in 2 other states. So it just got worse in 2 places out, 2 other states. It didn't get better where we are. And so we've got this interesting balance of doing things, but still not doing enough that we can serve everyone. Or not serve, not that we can't not serve people, but serve everyone in a really comprehensive way that meets the demand.
Yeah. And I get that it's a touchy subject too, right? Because there are certain individuals out there who make false claims just because they're upset with the person or they're getting a divorce or whatever it may be. So I know there's also that fine line because if we don't do things right, there could be innocent people that could be going to jail or prison for something that they really didn't do just because of spite.
Yeah, and that's a that's a really interesting point because I've seen that in my own life, plus people not reporting for fear of retaliation, and then some
Mhm.
people just never talking about it because they're so afraid of what other people might think. And so the percentage of false allegations is so small. We know it's one of the most underreported crimes in Utah, in the nation, and in the world because people are met with such resistance. There's so frequently what happens is, oh, my ex-husband, my ex-boyfriend, my ex-girlfriend, they were awful to me and I underwent this terrible abuse. And then somebody says, but oh, they're so nice. Like they're so nice. They have such a good career. And what's important to remember is that an abuser isn't just manipulating their victim, they're manipulating everybody around them. And so there's, I guess I would err on the side of thinking about how underreported this crime is and start by believing people because these false allegations are so far and few in between. I mean, I think it's like 0.5% of allegations are revealed to be false. And we know that there are even more that are never reported. And with the occurrence in Utah so high, again, the likelihood somebody is telling the truth or not disclosing something terrible that's happened to them is infinitely higher than a false allegation.
And thank you for bringing that up, right?
Yeah, of
And thank you
course.
for showing the difference in the numbers, because that even opened my eyes even more, right? And you are, I just have to say you're 100% correct, probably. And I'm not around it as much as you are, right? You see this quite often. And again, it's that, why aren't we talking about it? And again, you said it's the fear of retaliation, right? Because that fear, I mean, an abuser, they're bullies. That's basically just blunt. They're bullies and they scare people. They put so much fear into them that, how could they? They want to, but they're so scared, whether this abuser threatened to take the kids or kill the kids or kill their parent or whatever it may be, right? Or take their home, throw them on the streets. There's so much that a lot of us don't understand. And again, people and businesses that do what you guys are doing there, you're their voices, right? You're the ones that's going, my gosh. And I've had, like I said earlier, I've had people on the show, both men and women, who have come on the show and talked about what they went through. And it's those voices that just somebody, maybe just someone might hear this show and go, by golly, if they did it, I can do it, right?
Yeah,
And knowing that they have the help, knowing that they can get on the phone and call Josie and say, who do I need to speak to help me get out of this situation? Because
yeah,
I can't have them find out, because if they do, I don't know what will happen to me. So
yeah.
it's almost got to be done under the radar.
So I have a couple of things to add there. First, I'd start by calling the shelter or the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot I can personally do to help somebody get out of a situation, but our victim advocates at South Valley Services or the victim advocates at the state level through the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition can help. And it is just a phone call away from those resources. And a few of the shelters even have text lines. So if you're not safe to call, you can send a quick text.
Yeah.
And then a tip I have for people who might have a loved one or maybe themselves are going through something is to save the hotline number as somebody's work phone. So, for example, if I had a friend who I thought might be in trouble, I could say, like, listen, if you need to talk, I'm here, but also I don't really know the details. And if you don't want to tell me, that's okay. But can I have your phone? And I'm going to enter the hotline number for the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition or South Valley Services, depending on where they live. And that way, if you ever need to call them, it'll look like you just called me at work. And, we chat all the time. And then that way, if they're being digitally tracked, there's no evidence that they might be looking for a way out.
Wow, that's really good to know. Because
Yeah,
you know somebody that's overpowering, right? That you know that they're keeping an eye on them 24/7.
yes. And the most dangerous time for domestic violence survivors is when they leave. And so to not give somebody any sort of indication that they might be looking for an exit keeps them safer for longer.
Yeah. Question for you, and I don't know if you will know the answer on this one, and it's okay if you don't. It just popped into my head. With the domestic violence, and we talked about, the substance abuse and mental health. Is that a large percentage of what causes it, or is it just somebody who is just, I don't know. There's not a nice way of putting it, so I guess I just won't go that direction because I'm not here to bash you because I don't know their history, right? Just like somebody doesn't know my history. Is that what you find the large percentage of this comes from?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question for all sorts of reasons. And I guess I would start by saying maybe let's define what domestic violence is or domestic abuse. And it is anything that can be utilized to maintain or gain power and control over another person. And so sometimes substance use disorder is used as a tool to exert control over another person, right? If you leave, I'll call the police and tell them about your drug use, and then you'll go to jail. If you leave, I'll tell the police, and then they'll take away your kids, and I'll get them, and you'll never see them again. Mental illness can also be used as a target point, like it could be used to gaslight somebody, right? You're crazy, you don't know what happened, my perspective is true, why are you overreacting? Or you're flawed, you're broken, nobody else will love you if you leave me. And so those can be used as tools for abuse. And I would also like to add that substance use disorder doesn't cause domestic violence, it just worsens it. And so thinking that the abuse would go away if somebody got sober is generally false. The abuse might get less severe, maybe it would get less physically violent, but it would still be there. And so I have heard in my entire career just one instance of somebody getting sober, like no longer using alcohol, and then the relationship was fine, right? They got sober, they got anger management treatment, or yeah, anger management treatment, and that relationship ended up working out. Generally, that's not true, and the abuse continues regardless of whether or not somebody is dealing with substance use disorder or not. And so it's a little bit tricky. I guess my message would be don't stick around thinking, oh, if they get sober, it'll get better. And maybe it would, but you don't want somebody's sobriety to be contingent on, I guess, yeah, I generally speaking, substance use disorder worsens abuse, but it's not the sole cause.
Okay. And are you considering, and I heard you mention alcohol, is alcohol falling into that same category?
Yeah, I was lumping it in the same category.
Okay. Okay, because I know what it's like personally, right? When alcohol's involved, because I left a relationship because of that, and the person who I fell in love with and married was definitely not that person under the influence of alcohol. I mean, it was like
Yeah.
Jekyll and Hyde, right? And that's what drew me back all the time because whenever the sobriety kicked in, it's like I start seeing this woman I fell in love with, right? And I start falling back into that trap, and then all of a sudden there's Dr. Jekyll.
Yeah, it's a
You
cycle
know?
of abuse.
Yeah, yeah, definitely that cycle for sure.
And what makes it so tricky too, I think there's commonly this belief of, well, why don't you leave? And it's way more complicated than that, right? For all sorts of reasons, like I mentioned, like we've been talking about the threats of violence, the threat of legal action, all sorts of things. So, but there's also the cycle of abuse, right? So there's an act of an abuse, then a honeymoon period. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again. I love you. And people are sticking around because there's this, well, for a lot of reasons, but there's this moment of, I love you, I'll do better, I can be better. And then tension builds and another action happens, and then you're back in the honeymoon stage. And so it does take an average of 7 times before somebody leaves for good out of an abusive relationship. And there's so many factors going on, but it's so important to understand that it's almost expected that somebody goes back before they leave for good and just to continue supporting the person. Which another useful tip, and this is going to sound so counterintuitive, but if you know somebody who's in an abusive relationship, don't critique their partner, critique the partner's actions. And it's like your gut instinct is like, but oh my gosh, my cousin's boyfriend is such a piece of trash and I hate him and he's so awful to her. But there's already so much shame surrounding domestic violence that if you say something about their partner and they go back, they'll feel so like there's this narrative of, oh, I'm so foolish. Josie told me what a piece of trash he was, and I didn't listen, and now I'm stuck in this situation again. I'm so embarrassed I can't go talk to Josie about it. But if you critique their action of like, hey, cousin, when your boyfriend yelled at you in public, that was a really crappy thing for him to have done, and I don't think you deserve to be treated like that. There's a little bit of a shame reduction there.
Just by changing that wording around. Yeah, and it does, right?
Just a tiny switch.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had you Sarah on the show a
Okay.
while, quite a while ago, and,
Yeah.
and we were talking about language and how there was studies done on when you talk to people about homeless compared to if you changed it to the unsheltered. That's why you've heard me say unsheltered, because I learned
Yeah.
from having them on the show. The perspective, how people look at it, is completely different. They have more compassion for the unsheltered, less compassion for those who are homeless. And again, it's that stigma, right? That stigma falls into place.
That's so interesting. I'll have to integrate that into my language moving forward. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I always thought it was, and they've also done to where basically, the gals that are on the streets, right? And instead of calling them prostitutes, they're changing the name to being they're trafficked.
yes.
And so society again looks at it completely different just by changing the word. And it's basically true, right? I've had gals just even recently who have been on my show, and they've opened it up. And again, see, that's something that, what is it, the three monkeys, they don't want to hear and they don't want to talk and they don't want to see. Especially here in Utah, it's like we don't want to hear anything about sex, right? But these women talked about how they got pulled into it, and before they knew it, it was too late. So it's crazy.
Yeah, and similarly with domestic violence, it starts like all love does, right? It's sweet, it's exciting, um, you're invested, and it looks like a promising bright future, and then just gradually little things happen. And if you don't know what to look for, suddenly you're in an incredibly abusive situation and you can't leave. You're isolated from your family and friends. Maybe your abuser's taken control of your finances and wrecked your credit score, so you cannot find housing, you can't take out a loan. Your options are so limited. And it's amazing how quickly it can happen. And so, as an aside, South Valley Services actually has a prevention and education program. And part of the work we do there is we go to middle schools and high schools and teach those students about how to identify healthy and unhealthy behaviors in relationships and what to do if you see unhealthy behaviors and how to intervene if you see your friend in a relationship with unhealthy behaviors. And we're trying to get ahead of it because even though the work we do at our shelter and our community resource centers and our survivor advocacy center is so, so important, it's inheritably reactive, right? So if we can get people why they're young and teach them like what is and is not okay in a relationship, then maybe we can start to get ahead of this issue.
And that's a really good point, Josie. Thank you for bringing that up, because that is so true, right? And not blaming families of what because we all grow up in different types of families, right? I grew up in a family where when things didn't go right, you got angry. You threw a fit. You threw things, you punched things, you kicked things, you yelled. That's how I thought it was a normal way. I thought that was the normal way of reacting when things didn't go my way, right? Or if somebody got in my face, or if somebody did something that I didn't approve with. And I watched it all throughout my childhood. Terrible, terrible anger issues. I mean, my fuse was very, very tiny. It didn't take much for it to explode. I spent many hours in ERs because they were either picking glass out of my hands or wood or thinking I broke my wrist because I was hitting things. And then one day I hurt somebody that I cared about. And when I saw him laying on the floor, curled up in a ball, I'm like, what the hell am I doing?
Yeah.
This is this is not who I want to be, right? 6 months of therapy I went through. I mean, 6 months worth to learn how to recognize the signs and to also realize I had a choice. I didn't need to react the way that I reacted. I could have chosen to take different actions. However, you only get to that point by going through these certain steps to help rewire those neurons in your brain, right? Because you've done it the majority of your life and you're so quick to react. And it's amazing what that does for your life and through the remainder of your life. Because I've been challenged many, many, many times. And it's literally like I see blinders coming in. I literally my peripheral vision goes away and it's like I get that tunnel vision. I recognize it. I right away, and I know I need to get away from this situation as quick as possible because I don't want to go back in that arena. I've
Yes.
been away from it since my mid 20s and I'm 60 now. I do not want to step in that freaking cesspool again. And it also sounds like with what South Valley Services does is when people are reaching out for help also and some of these other organizations, they're giving them these tools, right? There's services that they can get for free that help put more tools in their tool pouch per se to help them along that journey. Because again, it doesn't happen overnight.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that experience. And it's so true, right? We have a framework we were raised within. And as children and young adults, that is just what we know. And we assume what's happening in our household is happening in other households, unless there's an intervention point and somebody realizes that's not true. And so within our shelter, not only do we have therapy for adults, we have therapy for children because we're trying to teach them that what they're experiencing isn't normal. And then it's also, sorry, I tear up thinking about
No,
the
it's
kids.
okay. It's all right.
It's not their fault.
Yes.
And by teaching them this through in the schools and in our shelter, we're hoping to break these cycles that children are witnessing and then repeating because they more or less don't know any better. And so we give people tools through therapy. We work with our victim advocates and case managers to do safety planning. So if you do go back, what do you do if X action happens? Who can you call? Where can you go? And for kids, it's similar. Like, is there a neighbor's house you could go to? Or can you go into your bedroom and close the door and be safe there? And so, yeah, we do give a lot of tools because, I mean, I think everyone can choose nonviolence. And it takes so much work, and not everybody's willing to do that. But just like you were saying, um, you don't have to choose violence. You can choose nonviolence. I don't want to say just as easily, right? Because it takes work to
Mhm.
get to that point, and not everybody's willing to do that work. But you can, yeah, violence is always a choice.
Yeah. And again, I commend you guys for wanting to get into the schools. And I'm just throwing this out there because I don't know. But I believe with what you guys are doing would also help cut down on bullying
Yeah,
because people see kids see what's happening in their home. They think that's how you treat people, right? So when they see somebody that's different in school, they're going to do the same thing, right? I mean, I'm kind of guessing there, but I mean, I grew up just because of, I mean, I would make fun of people, which is crazy because I was made fun of a lot when I was a child because I was crippled. I had the platform shoe, the Forrest Gump brace on my leg. I was teased all the time. And then I get into my adulthood. And as much as I did not like being teased, now I'm making fun and teasing other people. just to make myself feel better. Right. And that's
Yeah.
the majority of what it is. There's something wrong with me, not them, because I'm doing it to make myself look more superior than this other person. And I'm sure this is exactly what you see all the time.
Yeah. So when we go into the schools, we do a pre and post survey from those presentations. And from the beginning to end, it's like 85 to 95% of the students can identify um, bullying or abusive behaviors that they couldn't identify at the beginning of the class. And I'm fairly certain that 5 to 15% who can't is just like the 5 to 15% of high schoolers and middle schoolers who aren't going to pay attention no matter what you do. And that's totally fine, right? Like that's developmentally appropriate for at least a few of them to be goofing off and not listening.
Right.
And but it's a profound effect. And it's hard to measure the effectiveness of behaviors that do not happen or that were prevented. But hopefully, we're breaking through. I mean, we're breaking through to at least a majority of the students within that presentation. And the hope is that they can take the knowledge they've gained from that into their life, like the next day, maybe that afternoon, and well beyond then. And hopefully create a future where people are saying no to violence and I can treat people better and I deserve to be treated better too.
Yeah. Well, you guys are hitting the nail on the head because, as we start educating people at a younger age, before back in the days when I was growing up, I mean, basically kids were told that they were supposed to be seen, not heard, right? And I was also taught there at an early age that you didn't like if I was playing a sport, you didn't start at a young age because you would develop bad habits. So you had to start later. Man, for years now, right? I mean, look at some like the greatest golfer that I know of in my generation, Tiger Woods, right? And I grew up watching Jack Nicklaus and Johnny Miller and Arnold Palmer and these guys that were very good golfers. Tiger started as soon as he could stand up, as soon as he could stand on his own two legs, he was using a golf club, right? And by teaching things at that early age, you take that into your adulthood and you again put more tools in that pouch to help better your skills and it turns us into I think better individuals
Yeah.
and gives us an opportunity to spread more love instead of more discomfort. And there's an H word that I just don't like to use. I've taken it out of my vocabulary, but I think you understand what word I'm looking because there's too much of that in this world already and we got to get rid of it.
I agree.
Yeah. Gosh, the stuff that you've shared today, Josie, I mean, has been so interesting. And as we talked before the show too, before we hit the record, I've not really heard of South Valley Services. I think it was mentioned maybe here and there, but unless you hear it all the time, it doesn't stick in your memory, right? That's why they
Yeah.
play commercials on the radio all the time, because after the seventh or eighth time that you hear it, it finally starts sticking in our brains. So um, it's I don't look at it as a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences. How you and I met at a networking group, and you just happened to come to my table, and I think as soon as I shared, you kind of looked at me, and then when you shared, I was looking at you like, yeah, we need to talk, right?
Yes.
After this event,
Yes.
that's kind of exactly how it went down too. It's like, yeah, we got to connect after this event and chat a little bit, and I just got to say thank you. I mean, seriously, thank you to you and your whole organization for doing what you're doing. And whatever we can do on our end to help spread the word, I mean, just let us know. You know,
Yeah. Can I
I'm
do a quick call to action for your followers?
absolutely, you betcha.
Okay, great. So South Valley Services is on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And we also have a monthly newsletter that goes out that you can sign up for at our website. And if people want to stay in touch with me and see the work I'm doing, both for South Valley Services and some of the mental health advocacy work I do, they can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not on other social media websites.
You stayed away from that, huh?
Well, I have a Facebook page that more or less exists.
Okay.
And then I got off Instagram and then TikTok I've never even dabbled in. It's just, I don't know. I know myself and I'd spend way too much time on it. So I just avoided it altogether.
I understand that. That's how I am with video games. I started getting addicted to video games in my early 20s, and I went, you know what? I spend more time inside on a beautiful day than I do outside.
Yeah,
So and I've not, well, let me rephrase that. I have played a few with my grandson and granddaughters. And
yeah.
that's a little different. However, once I'm done, I'm done. I don't do none of the Warcraft, or I stay away from it completely because of my experience that I had back then, because I know I'd end up I mean, if I can get that fifth diamond on Sonic, I'm gonna go after that fifth diamond, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. You got to see it through to the end.
You betcha. So, please, I know I've got some of your emails, but Josie, please let me rephrase this. Would you please send me an email with everything that you have, all your sites, social media, everything, because I want to make sure that I put it on the caption when the show goes out. So everything is right there.
So happy to. Yeah.
Yeah, that way people don't have to listen to the whole show before they get to this information. That information is already there that they can click on or share with other
Yeah.
individuals.
I'll do that as soon as we hop off.
Okay. Is there is there anything else you'd like to discuss or throw out there? I mean, this show has gone so fast. I mean, literally, we are almost right up at an hour already, and
That's wild.
it just flew right by, and it's because it was good conversation and very good topics. So thank you for
Yes.
sharing your knowledge. Is there anything else that you could think of that you'd like to throw out there?
I would say that when you're in a situation, a domestic violence situation, it can feel totally hopeless. But like I said, there are hundreds of advocates in our state who want to help and can help. It's just a matter of picking up the phone and making that first call. And that is, in and of itself, such a courageous thing to do. But we're here to help. We want to help and we can help. So give us a call. We're just a few buttons away.
There you go. And there are other locations that you mentioned earlier in the show,
Yes.
other locations that are out there. And I used to work at City Hall in the West Jordan, and
Yeah.
they had a place. And I remember I was working for the chamber at the time, and I would say at least two or three times in a month, people would come in looking for that type of service, right?
Yeah.
And I'd have to take them across the hall and show them, where it was at. And so it's happening out there quite a bit,
Yeah.
too much.
It is, but there is hope.
There is, there's always hope. There's
Yeah.
there's always hope. And again, thank you to what you do, and again to your team in South Valley Services, and all the other organizations that are out there that are helping individuals get away from a very, very touchy subject. Because you said it a few times during this podcast. It's not easy. It's like how I used to throw at my ex-wife all the time. It's like, just stop drinking. Why can you not just stop? Well, it's hard for that individual who's falling under the abuse of addiction, no matter what the addiction is. And it's the same. I guess you could almost put the domestic violence in as an addiction as well, right? Because we kind of stay in that same
Yeah.
realm. So it's not so easy. It have a little bit more compassion.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Josie, I know you've got probably a busy day ahead of you, and thank you again for taking time out of your day, because I know you're at work doing this podcast, and I just want to say, thank you for taking this hour to share this information. And I'm a firm believer that somebody will hear this show, and it's going to change their life, and hopefully it can save someone, if not multiple, because all it takes is one person. We never know
Yes.
what the domino effect will be just from that one person. So
Yeah.
again, thank you so much for everything.
Yeah. Thank you. This was an absolute delight.
Thank you so much. Well, guys, again, thank you to all of you, and I hope all of you had a happy Easter, and your day was filled with a lot of love and joy. And thank you to all our guests, all our past guests, our past sponsors. And really thank you to all you listeners out there. You guys are the ones that are making this all possible. And I am so blessed and grateful to have all you guys here. And remember this, addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing for everything. We're out.